Hello and welcome to today's lesson on the 1905 revolution. First thing I'd like you to do is have a look at your 5G source and read his account of the events of Bloody Sunday. Now, Bloody Sunday was the trigger to the 1905 revolution. So the 1905 revolution was the first of the three revolutions we'll look at in our course. This is the first serious threat to Nicholas's rule and the first serious attempt to overthrow the Tsar. So the 1905 revolution is basically a year of unrest. It begins with the demonstrations in Petersburg that are part of Bloody Sunday, and it escalates and spreads across the whole country, taking in various different forms of protest, including strikes, the creation of trade unions, which of course were illegal, the assassination of Nicholas's own uncle, mutiny within the navy, a massive general strike in October as well. Now, we can kind of summarise the event and the causes of the 1905 revolution into these 4 bullet points: the Russo-Japanese War, long-term desire for reform, long-term discontent among workers and peasantry, and growing political opposition within Russia. So we'll start off, firstly, with the very short-term cause, Bloody Sunday. Now, Bloody Sunday was a demonstration, initially not revolutionary. So it's a demonstration that was deliberately couched in kind of paternalistic terms, asking the Father Tsar, please, can you do something to help the terrible conditions of the industrial workers? Now, it became revolutionary when the workers were fired upon by Russian soldiers, and there were Cossack charges, and many died. What this did was shatter the myth of the good Father Tsar, who is there to listen to his people and to help them. It means that now anger at the way Russia is being governed is no longer being directed towards the Tsar's ministers, but towards the Tsar himself. So the events of Bloody Sunday unwittingly set the revolution into motion. This is a spark, but there have been long-term build-up of discontent within Russia. So you know already that a huge percentage of the Russian population were peasantry. They were suffering from terrible living conditions. Despite the emancipation of 1861, their lives had not really improved at all. Similarly, there were growing numbers of workers in industrial cities, but these were workers who were working extremely long hours in extremely poor conditions and living in slums. So there was a rising discontent among both the peasantry and the workers within Russia. It wasn't just the socio-economic conditions of Russia which led to discontent, though. The political policies of the Tsarist regime were also making people very unhappy. We've got, for example, the policy of Russification with the persecution of ethnic minorities. We have the fact that the middle class were unable, despite wanting to get involved in politics because of the influence of Zemstvos being reduced and the fact that we have no political party system. So political parties were illegal at this point. This is forcing what should be reform into revolution. We then have, in the short term, the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 1905. So they were fighting over strategic territories in China, and Russia believed that they were the greater power, that they were ethnically superior to Japan, and therefore it was assumed that they would just be able to easily win this war, and it would heighten patriotic fervour and national pride, and so it would be a great boost to the Tsarist regime. However, it did not go that way at all. In fact, it was a total, utter defeat for the Russians. Complete humiliation. Russian forces were left without supplies as the Trans-Siberian Railway was unfinished and there was no effective way of moving troops from east to west. The Baltic fleet was utterly destroyed. It took months to reach the Pacific, and then it was immediately destroyed within 45 minutes. This led to great embarrassment to be defeated by an Asiatic power, and it added to the view that the Tsarist government was utterly incompetent. The Tsar had to agree to a humiliating peace treaty with the Japanese, and defeat in the war led to the mutiny on board the Potemkin battleship. So, the Potemkin. In June 1905, a bloody uprising broke out aboard Potemkin, one of the premier battleships in the Russian Navy. Threatened with death for refusing to eat their maggot-ridden rations, the crew turned on their officers, killed their captain, and seized control of the ship. After raising the red flag of the revolution, they spent the next 11 days prowling the Black Sea in a futile attempt to spark a rebellion against Tsar Nicholas II. If you turn onto the second side of your Feiges, you will read his account of the mutiny on the Potemkin. Now, the Potemkin mutiny is important in the symbol that it will become later on in Soviet myth. It isn't successful, it is put down. However, it's probably the best example of one of a series of localised army mutinies in the 1905 revolution. Potemkin is one of those big what-if moments of revolution. What if the army in 1905 hadn't stayed loyal to the Tsar? What if this mutiny had spread throughout the rest of the Russian armed forces? It could be that the Tsar would not have regained control after 1905 if the Potemkin mutiny had spread. So here we have a quick summary of the causes of the 1905 revolution. So, short term or long term? I'd now like you to write a summary list of the causes of the 1905 revolution and colour code it to show which ones were short term, which ones were long term. Now I'd like you to think about which was the most important cause of the 1905 revolution. To help you with that, here is an importance pyramid. So what's the most important reason you get up to go to school in the morning? Is it to study maths, to gain qualifications, to see my friends? A legal requirement. Can you create your own importance pyramid with the most important coming at the top there to least important at the bottom? Rank your own 1905 revolution pyramid. So far this lesson then, we've been focused on the causes of the revolution. Now we're going to focus a bit more on the events of the revolution itself. Because this was a revolution that lasted a long time. It wasn't just a couple of days or even a month or so. It was basically the entire year of 1905. Russia was in unrest and revolution. So how did it escalate from the demonstration in Petersburg on Bloody Sunday to a full-scale revolution that was rocking the entire Russian Empire? The historian Abraham Escher said we should think of 1905 not as a single revolution, but as a series of parallel revolutions. So lots of different disaffected groups, not acting together in concert, but acting in isolation, and each rising up in their own revolution for their own reasons and in their own manner. So we can start here with the disaffected groups in Russian society. So that's the middle class liberals who have been pushed into revolution because of the failure of the Russian system to give them a political outlet for any opposition or criticism they would like to make of the government. Industrial workers who want a better living conditions. Peasantry who have not seen their lives improve since emancipation. National minorities who are suffering under the policies of Russification. And they all took part in protests or other forms of revolutionary activity. Now, it's initially kind of more of a middle class revolution. You've got the liberals begin petitioning campaigns. A national congress of Zemstvo representatives is held to demand further reform. And you've got eventually the creation of legal political parties, particularly the cadets. The working class revolt through a wave of strikes, and these ultimately end up in a massive general strike in October. So if you think of the latter half of 1905, it's characterised by increasing working class militancy. The peasantry, it's largely disorder against the local landowners within the countryside, particularly within the Black Earth region. But you also have the formation of an all-Russian peasants' union, which is kind of masterminded by the SRs. The national minorities join in the general strikes. So, for example, in Latvia there's a general strike, and in Poland there is a big demonstration which ends up with protesters, about 93 of them, dying in Warsaw. And we get reform becoming revolution with increasing numbers of localised mutinies in the army, particularly Potemkin. So this timeline gives you an idea of the kind of events and escalation of the 1905 revolution. So we begin with Bloody Sunday. We go on to see the assassination of the Tsar's uncle, to strikes, etc. So, in this year of revolution, was Nicholas actually in danger? Well, yes. His own uncle is assassinated in February, Grand Duke Sergei. The Tsar himself and his family become increasingly concerned for their own well-being, and so they start to cancel almost all public appearances and isolate themselves further from the Russian people and the Russian middle class, those who they need to court in order to turn it from revolution back to just reform. They start to stay away from them, and so their isolation increases, and so the likelihood of another revolution coming increases as well. Now, one important part of the 1905 revolution is the creation of the St. Petersburg Soviet. Now, you know Soviet as in Soviet Russia, you're thinking communism. But at this point, Soviet does not mean that. Soviet means a council of elected representatives of workers. So, not yet communist, just a body representing the workers. Now, it begins life essentially as a strike committee in October 1905. It's made to coordinate the October general strike. However, it goes on to be much more than just a strike coordination committee. Across Russia, it's quickly copied by lots of different towns and cities. So there are 50 other towns who have their own Soviet by the end of 1905. And it starts to diversify. It's not just about striking. It publishes its own newspaper, it creates its own armed militia, it acts as a local government body distributing food in order to help the industrial workers in need. And ultimately, it begins to engage in political campaigning. So this is an authentic working class organisation. It's not the middle classes trying to improve things for the working class. This is the working class, grassroots, improving things for themselves. It therefore doesn't really want to work with the Liberals very much. It wants to maintain its identity as a genuine working class organisation. It is notable that this is possibly one of the first moments where we get Trotsky really coming to the fore, certainly within our course. Leon Trotsky, of course, who is the great rival of Stalin later on. I'd now like you to have a read of page 303 of the textbook on the St. Petersburg Soviet and complete the St. Petersburg Soviet question grid. And finally, complete the large question grid on the 1905 revolution. If you'd like to know any more about events, I'd like you to read two Fides extracts. Firstly, why was there violence in 1905? And secondly, please everyone read his work on the Russo-Japanese War and complete the questions.